All right, welcome back to RSReplay. We are so excited to have our first in-person pod. That's right, we're here in the same room together for the first time ever. As always, I'm Nikhil Mehta, and with me is Ronald Toothe. If you don't know that by now, I'd be pretty surprised.
Very true. Yeah, it's crazy. We're here in the Mehta mansion, as I like to call it. It's been a great day. I mean, camp, just lots of good stuff going on right now. So
Yeah,
very glad to be here.
It's been a little under a year. I think I should have looked it up. I think probably about 11 months since we first did our first RSReplay pod together, and could not have been happier to have you join the show full time. It's been such a blast. Now we finally get to be like in the same room. Really
I know.
exciting.
It's so crazy, and I know all the people that you've met like through this Raven thing that we do. All the people that I've met, like especially even just today, like all the great people that I've had the chance to meet along the way. It's been really cool. So Ravens flock is definitely a community, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I got to go to training camp with Ron today at the castle, which another beautiful day. I feel like every single time I talk about training camp, I talk about the weather. But I feel like that really influences how you feel about the practice. Like if it's a sweltering practice and it's not going that well, it just feels like it sucks.
Yeah, I mean, especially considering how just like beyond dreadful it was the last few weeks before this. Being able to walk out there today, a shade over 80 degrees, not very humid at all. It was perfect.
All right, so I mean, I'll give you my very first impressions of training camp when I walked in. One is that you can really tell the players that are always working. I don't think it's necessarily an indictment on the players who aren't always out there. There's plenty of different reasons a guy might not be able to come out and get extra reps in, get early reps in, stay after practice. There's obviously plenty of reasons. They have plenty of film room and strategy and team meetings and stuff that takes up time. But I do think the guys that really work hard to make the extra time stand out. So that's something I always kind of try and notice at camp and something I noticed right away.
Yeah, you guys getting extra work in. Even after practice, we saw, like OA, guys like that were kind of really getting it in. So, yeah, it was a lot of energy today. It was a stark contrast from kind of sort of what we've heard. The last 2 days, it's been, things were kind of ramped down. It wasn't a very energetic day, talk about over the weekend and Monday, but today was a stark contrast to that.
Yeah, so I think, we went over a lot of training camp today in camp notes on RSReplay.com. So if you're looking for a lot of information about today's training camp specifically, be sure to check that out. But overall in training camp, what have been some of your first impressions of just how the team is looking heading into the season?
Good. There's a lot being made right now about how the offense hasn't really been clicking the last maybe week or so. And this is one that we addressed in the camp notes, so go check it out. But I don't think that's so much of a detriment to the offense and a example of why they're not going to be quite as good this year. They've been playing against these defensive guys every single day for 3 weeks now. So if they weren't kind of coming back down to earth a little bit and the defense wasn't stepping up, I'd be much more concerned than the offense going through kind of a rough stretch. So I don't really have too many sizzling thoughts about camp right now. Honestly, it seems like it's just all kind of gone for the most part, and knock on wood, status quo.
Yeah, obviously they've avoided any big injuries again, knock on wood. The one to Vince Beagle does hurt. I don't want to undersell that one at all because I think he was probably going to make this team, probably going to be at least a rotation player off the edge at outside linebacker. And, that position is extremely thin, which is probably one of the main storylines of camp up to this point, is just that they just don't have bodies there, right? They have OA and Houston, and those are two clear starters, but no Dalen Hayes popping. You've got veteran Stephen Means, who, he'll produce, he'll give you good snaps. He'll give you quality snaps, but if you're looking for pass rushing production, if you're looking for, him to change a game, I just don't know where they're getting that from early in the season other than OA. And the problem is, I think OA is going to hit a lot of double teams early on.
Yeah, because of that fact, because there is no clear-cut defined number two. I mean, Justin Houston's there, and he's more than serviceable, but they're really – every single offensive coordinator is going to take one look at our defensive front and say, all right, we're just going to double OA, and we'll take our chances with whether it's Houston, whether it's Bowser coming off his injury. It's very much a hole right now, and hopefully it's one that they can get fixed before the season. Again, like Steven Means has been pretty impressive, but I don't expect him to be the savior for our number 2 pass rusher problem.
Yeah, and I think the main thing that I'm hoping will be the kind of balancing effect is how talented and deep this defensive line is. When Calais the six I think that are very, very clear standouts: Calais Campbell, Justin Madubuike, Broderick Washington, Travis Jones, Brent Urban, and Michael Pearson. I should always forget Pearson when I'm listing them because his signing happened so early in the offseason that he's become a little bit of an afterthought. Not because he's not looking good or anything like that, but just the fact that you're excited about how deep this group is, it's almost easy to forget a guy who's probably going to be one of the key starters.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely probably the deepest group, besides from probably safety, I would say, probably the deepest group on the team right now. And it's probably the only, like the sole saving grace of the fact that there's such a lack of pass rush after OA right now is the fact that that unit is so strong. So maybe all the attention they get can just open things up for that other side and, force teams to not be able to just double team OA every time and really maybe help a true number 2 option on the edge kind of emerge.
Yeah, and we're obviously still not really sure what the deal is with Bowser, how close he is. All the reports are that he's doing really well, he's on or ahead of schedule, but we don't know what the schedule is. And I think the Ravens are, as they have been with everyone, they're going to play it cautious. They're in this season for the long haul. I think you don't want to be super shorthanded going up against the Jets in week 1, but you also don't want to force J.K., Gus, anyone really to play if they're just not ready. And if they're they're guys, these are football players, right? These are NFL football players who played football all their life. They're trying to play. Dobbins is the main one who, all I've heard about Dobbins before he made his practice debut was he's pushing. He's trying to get out there to the point where if he could dress up and put on his uniform or put on a different number and sneak out there as maybe Nate McCrary, he would. Mm-hmm. He's just hungry like that, which is great. But you also do have to do your job as the team, as the management, as the coaching staff to make sure that no one gets too overcommitted.
Yeah, of course. And, in terms of the running backs, especially just when there's so much depth there, which is kind of the difference between that and the edge rushers in terms of you really want Bowser back, and not saying that you're going to rush him at all, but I feel like the fire is going to be under him to get back a little quicker than somebody like a Gus Edwards, just because there's so little of a safety net there. It's like of course we need Gus Edwards, but we actually need Tyus Bowser back very soon.
Yeah, and speaking of the running backs, I think that's actually one of the situations I'm most comfortable about. I think Hill looks fantastic in practice. Mike Davis looks, he's a vet. He knows how to carry the ball. He doesn't fumble. I actually think that, and I know I'm going to get called blasphemous for this, but I think Hill and Mike Davis will start the year as a poor man's version of Dobbins and Edwards. I think Hill's very versatile out of the backfield. He's been the best pass catching back of camp the entire time by far. Leaps and bounds. He is just running sharp routes. His pass protection is really solid. So is Davis's. And Davis is just his best season. Is something that I think Cole Jackson talks about a lot. Davis's best season in his career was in the only season he was in a primarily gap scheme offense, and that's what he's coming to in Baltimore. He hits those holes better. He makes those reads better, and so I think we'll actually get more production than people really expect out of him.
Yeah, me too. And we saw Devontae Freeman be at least relatively successful in this offense last year behind a patchwork offensive lines. So the scheme itself, I feel, is enough if you have at least serviceable guys in place to sort of elevate the running backs in that regard. And the stable we have right now is something that I'm not worried about whatsoever, especially in terms of rushing Gus back. No way.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. You think about the Ravens offense, I would say the last 3 years, pretty sharp at the beginning, I would say, typically in the first half of the season. In the second half of the season, it does slow down, and that's normal. That's normal for defenses to figure out more about offense. But in a way, having Dobbins, Edwards kind of come back, ramp up over the course of the season, they'll be fresher later. They'll be fresher down the stretch. Ideally, they'll be fresher. Hopefully, we're expecting this team to make the playoffs. In the playoffs, you hope that Dobbins and Edwards are just a little bit fresher, because once Hill and Mike Davis and even Tyler Beatty get settled in the rushing game, get settled in the offense over the course of the season, what they'll then get to do over the course of the year is, Dobbins and Edwards will dominate carries in the second half once they're fully healthy, but they won't have to necessarily, once the game is a little bit further out of reach, we have multiple guys we can go to instead of just saying, okay, take out the two starters and put in the third string. We'll actually be able to share that load even more and keep the tear off of their drive. Keep the top tread off of their tires.
Yeah, and it doesn't even feel like there's that much of like a drop off. Fantasy football owners might not like it too much because it's going to be, there's going to be those weeks where they get out to a huge lead and, it ends up being Dobbins 10 carries, Gus 8, and then the rest of the game is just split between those guys. So from a fantasy football perspective, people might not like it, but in terms of actual success and on the field success for the Ravens, it's a great formula to have, and it's a good problem to have, having this many guys.
Yeah, and speaking of Dobbins gets 8, Gus gets 10, whatever. Jackson's picking up a lot of the
carries. That too.
He's going to have 5+ carries a game minimum, I would expect, if not more. Just designed rushes, and then all of his scrambles on top of that. And
we even saw Duvernay get like 4 different sweeps today, so he's going to be involved in the run game as well.
Yeah, and I think part of that's a concerted effort to share the load. Show different looks, do something different. And it's hard. You talked about at the beginning of the pod the way, it seems like the defense has been getting better than the offense. You talked about it in camp notes. But watching the offense operate, regardless of necessarily the outcome of each play, just seeing how they're kind of meshing. This is an offense with actually a really significant amount of turnover from last year. That I think is something that's been a little bit under discussed. Like the offensive line, ideally Linderbaum is back, but you're going to have a new center either way. I still think that Ben Powers won't start at left guard. So new left guard, Tyree Phillips, not new, but was not mostly part of the unit last year. You got Moses at right tackle, new. Left tackle is either Stanley, who was not there last year, Juwan James, who did not play last year. Kevin Zeitler is the constant, which, right guard being a constant on the offensive line typically bodes well for the Ravens. But that, and then you look at the receiving core, and it's like Andrews is the only main guy that's back outside of Jackson in all the skill positions. He's the only main guy that's back. Yeah, Nick Boyle was present last year, but not super, or he was there last year, but not super present. Same thing with Duvernay, Prochet, Tylan Wallace, even Bateman to a certain extent, just because he missed so much of the season and then didn't get to play with Lamar. New offense. And, them looking really good early in training camp actually felt really good. And the fact that the defense has caught up, bodes well for Mike McDonald for sure, and the defense he's putting together. But it does remind you a little bit that this offense is still kind of a very new offense.
Yeah, and it's almost like that early success in camp was like a blessing and a curse, because it was great to see him do well, but it automatically made people think like, oh, they're back. They're not going to make any mistakes. Like it's 2019 all over again. Pop the champagne. It's like, let's pump the brakes a little bit. There's still going to be some learning curves here. There's so many new guys, especially like when you have to replace that level of guys on the offensive line, or that number of guys, I should say, on the offensive line. It takes a long time to click on a consistent basis, and I'm not too worried about it.
Speaking of replacing guys, I think that Devin Duvernay is going to be a solid deep threat for this team. And so I think you think about Hollywood Brown and what he brought to this team, and what the need to replace him is. The need to replace him is not, Rashad Bateman is the new Hollywood Brown. Rashad Bateman was kind of already a need and is filling his own, he's filling his own path. He's taking off in his own lane. But you do need to replace that, at least maybe not exactly the production, but certainly the deep threat that Hollywood Brown can offer. And I will say Devin Duvernay has just looked like a renewed deep threat. I know the injury had some people worried early, but something that Greg Roman has said, something that's very apparent in practice, is Duvernay also senses, like the rest of this team, something that's been very clear with like James Prochet all through camp. Duvernay senses this opportunity too, and I think he's ready to remind people why he was a third-round pick. I think I always kind of forget, it just kind of falls by the wayside. He was a third-round pick. The Ravens are still quite high on him, and I would say Prochet being out the last few weeks, it's kind of sad that you don't get to see the full offense together, the full receiving core at once. But I don't think there are moments, in the last few camps I've been to where I was like, oh, they're really missing James Prochet right now, because Duvernay has stepped up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and same. I mean, the times where you're like, with the receiving core, it's not because of lack of guys. It's because of like the guys that are there making dumb little mental mistakes, like Bateman dropping 2 balls today, like little things like that, not stuff where you're like, James Prochet would have got in there and made that one. You know what I mean? And that's no disrespect to Prochet. I think Prochet is great. But Duvernay and Prochet are probably, I'd imagine, ideally going to split that kind of deep threat role that you're talking about. But if Duvernay makes more plays like the 70-yarder he caught today, in short order, he's going to be the one taking on that sort of Hollywood role.
Yeah, I actually think he will be better on like deep crossers than Hollywood was. I think that was not Hollywood's strength. Really was those go routes down the sidelines and using nuances of his footwork to make guys hesitate and get open and things like that. And I just think Duvernay just has more in his bag, is able to honestly just run a more diverse route tree. And I think routes is something that we always like to talk about as like, oh, this person's route running is better. I know I've said a bunch of times I think Jalen Moore's route running has improved leaps and bounds from last year. But what does that really mean? And, that's kind of one thing I wanted to touch on today, because the Ravens wide receivers coach, T. Martin, their pass game specialist, Keith Williams, have gotten, I would say, like a little bit more buzz than your average assistant coaches have over the last few years because of the focus on receivers in Baltimore. And I have to say that the investment in receiver coaching just seems to be coming to fruition. It seems to be paying off in Baltimore. You can tell the way Williams works with the receivers, the way Martin works with receivers, focusing on the nuances and incorporating that into practices, incorporating that into games. You can actually see that process happening. If you've been watching really closely, you can see, okay, Devin Duvernay is like using head fakes and turning his shoulders and doing things to throw off defensive backs that he just has not been doing before. So it's encouraging.
Yeah, definitely. And it's almost kind of like you can lump T and Keith in with the rest of the receivers in the sense that, they all like to talk about they have a massive chip on their shoulder. Like they definitely hear everybody saying, they don't have the talent. The Ravens receiving core is this, it's that. I mean, those guys are all a direct representation of Keith and T's coaching. So, they're going to be just as pissed off when they hear that. So it's not surprising to see sort of I guess not camaraderie, but it's like even today when they were doing the sort of the press kind of get off drills and individuals, like all the receivers were so into it, and T was like really going at him, and it was just, or I think it was Keith Williams actually, was just like really going at him, and it was a very sort of lively, energetic session, and I think it's just very indicative of that sort of pack mentality that they all have now. It's just like it's us against the world.
I would even go so far to say it seems like it's the most like learning oriented environment of any group at camp. It just feels like there is they know that people are expecting them to do more. They know that like people want more out of them. But at the same time, they have to learn. They have to learn to get there and learn some of these skills, especially with these undrafted guys. And I think this is where, to me, the coaching is standing out. Jalen Moore is a good example because he had a year with these guys last year and has, you can tell Moore is working on becoming more than just a downfield threat, which is kind of where he popped a little bit last preseason. But he's been doing a lot more work underneath. His cuts are more precise. His footwork when it comes to like even things like how far apart his feet are when he's coming to his cuts, things like that you can tell are improving. I think Shamar Bridges is another great example of a guy who even within camp his route running has improved because he came in as this big guy. He didn't necessarily have to completely lose his man in college. D2 HBCU wasn't as big competition in D2 football, but now that he's in the NFL, he's like, okay, I got to get more separation because even if I get a little bit of separation, these guys are catching up and we're still having contested catches. So seeing him learn how to uncover, the big thing that he's doing really well is uncovering and finding soft spots in zone coverage, which is something that really this team only had Mark Andrews doing last year. I feel like they didn't have guys doing that. I feel like Prochet is also very good at that. And so developing those skills is obviously key to making it in the NFL and all that stuff, but the Ravens are actively doing it instead of kind of asking their receivers saying, okay, we need you to get here. Well, we're going to give you the best coaching we can. I feel like Bateman and Prochet have been excellent, just young leaders for the team too.
Yeah, it all circles back to that chip on your shoulder thing. There's not much we haven't said about the receiving core at this point, but it's outside of maybe a shaky day from Bateman today. Overall, it's been pretty promising to see, especially from some of the guys like Bridges that you just wouldn't really expect.
Yeah, and look, Bateman's drops in training camp. I'm as worried about them as I was about Jamar Chase's last year, which is to say, not at all. The fact that he's dropping the ball so much means he's getting open enough on plays consistently that a dropped pass is actually considered a dropped pass and not a pass breakup by the defender. And guys that have led the league in drops the last few years, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Deontay Johnson. I mean, those are really good receivers, and be happy to have that level of production out of Bateman this year. And you don't want drops. I want to be very clear, you don't want drops, but I'm not going to be, ringing the alarm bell because of drops, because there's more to it than just that number.
What do you got next time here?
I think the next thing I want to really think about is the preseason, right? These are, we love talking about training camp and your training camp standouts. Shout out Chris Westry, who unfortunately got cut by the Panthers after having one of the best training camps I've ever heard of in my lifetime last year, struggling with injuries, not really being able to hang on. I think he would have had more opportunities if he didn't get injured and then everyone around him didn't get injured and the season kind of went kaput. But it does remind you, training camp is not real hard-hitting, full-contact football. And, I think the preseason game is the first chance that we got to see a lot of these guys in action. And I think for me personally, the biggest questions, if I didn't really have any, but it was nice to, I guess, see it reinforced, was Kyle Hamilton is going to be that guy when it comes to just erasing plays on the defensive side of the ball. We've seen him make some nice plays in camp, caught up to Bateman on a deep ball the other day that was really impressive, but his speed, man, and not just his speed, something that's talked about in baseball, actually, let's go O's, something that's talked about in baseball, actually, route efficiency, like for outfielders trying to track down a ball. Mm-hmm. Hamilton is the same where he's not just getting there really quickly, he's taking the most efficient angles and routes. And I think that is the mark of a player who is not just using his athleticism to propel him as a rookie, but using his experience and his knowledge of football in general and trusting that. It's tough to necessarily just trust your instincts and trust, your college knowledge as Kyle Hamilton coming into the NFL. But in a way, you have to do that because you have to trust what you know.
Yeah, and that sort of makes you feel a lot better about some of the, the coverage issues we've seen and people making a mountain out of a molehill out of, in one-on-ones with zero help around him, he's getting beat by a slot receiver. Like, yeah, it's going to happen in practice. But the fact that the positives that we've seen have been from a mental aspect, like you much prefer to see that over, oh, he's just like trying to physically outbody everyone or just, only using his physical traits, which is a very college thing. And it's a very, like that's the thing that'll get you burned in the NFL quicker than anything. Just sort of not having the prowess upstairs that you have in your body. So it's promising to see in that regard. And his closing speed has just been or was ridiculous in that first preseason game.
The other thing I'd say about Hamilton is I don't think he necessarily took the criticism of him in one-on-ones as a dagger to the heart or anything like that. But he improved in one-on-ones since that stadium practice, and certainly in the last week or so. The Isaiah Likely Kyle Hamilton it's a must-watch at every camp. Unfortunately, we didn't really get any of those today, but in those drills, Hamilton is starting to win more of those reps, which are so slanted towards Likely, who's clearly a beast. Really, it's just a matter of, is Likely going to make a crazy diving catch that Hamilton can't do anything about? Yeah, he did a couple times, unfortunately, in their one-on-ones. But there are other plays where Hamilton just does a really good job, locking him up and not letting him get open. And that's something that he did admittedly struggle with early on. So you also love to see the improvement, and in a way, the kind of humility from a first-round pick to be like, all right, I've got to work on this. And if I don't care that it's against a fourth-round pick. It doesn't matter that he's drafted in the fourth round because he's kicking my butt out there. I need to improve that. And I love seeing that, especially from a guy who you kind of hope is hopefully one day the leader of the defense.
Yeah, you definitely hope so. And I think a lot of that can just be attributed to sort of like the Raven way, you know what I mean, in terms of defense and being persistent and not, psyching yourself out. I think that's a lot of it is a big part of it too. Another guy who I thought looked good in that first preseason game physically, he had some mental miscues, but he also forced the fumble, was Malik Harrison. And considering how sort of nervous we all are about that number 2 middle linebacker spot, him coming on, and if he can put it together in terms of the intangibles of the game, the way that he's put it together, how it appears to be physically this offseason, that could be a massive plus.
Yeah, Harrison looked good. I mean, Hamilton dove right on that fumble, right? Harrison punching that fumble out, and I thought generally he's going to have a little. I think he's going to be a little shaky because he might be asked to do a few different things because of the outside linebacker shortage. He has lined up there in camp. Not necessarily as an edge rusher, more as a run defender or dropping into coverage, but he's still kind of having to play a few different roles and wear a few different hats. Your boy Travis Jones had a big game. I mean, tracking down Malik Willis when he's trying to scramble away and being able to put on the brakes and turn the way he did on that sack against the Titans, not easy for a guy who's as big as he is.
Yeah, we even saw Kyle Hamilton kind of whiff trying to do the same thing on Malik Willis a little earlier. I mean, everything we've heard about Travis Jones so far has been gangbusters, so that doesn't really surprise me at all. And every day I feel like more and more that's going to end up being the biggest steal of this draft class, which is saying a lot considering the amount of top to bottom talent, including Isaiah Likely, who we talked about before. But it really seems like Travis Jones is going to be that next in line. That's sort of, not out of Brandon Williams. Now it's going to be him. Like the sky is the limit. I'm not going to put any specific predictions on what I think he's going to do, but so far he's showing that he was worth well more than a third-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, a guy mocks the first fall into the third and just keeps falling and just falls on the Ravens' lap, and they needed a young nose tackle. They needed to get a little younger along the interior of that line, a guy who can push the pocket a little bit. Trying to think of other major takeaways in this preseason game. Obviously, Shamar Bridges, who we've had on the podcast before, he told us on the podcast how determined he was to make this team to on special teams, run blocking, but also knowing he's a big body and they're kind of looking for that at the position. And man, did he show that! It was really something to see him have really those 2 big catches, but then active on special teams, very, very willing and able run blocker. You think about a 5th receiver for this team, and Shamar Bridges is tough to ignore.
Absolutely. Even in camp today, like he had one drop, and it was a tough catch. Like there's nobody that was knocking him for not catching it, and he gets up and he said a word that I will not state on the podcast right now. But he's very much that determination and all the things that he talked about when he spoke to us wasn't just lip service, and we're seeing that now. Like he's the real deal, and God, I hope he gets the 5th receiver spot here, because if he doesn't, he's going to go somewhere and make an active roster and be a nightmare for teams.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of the other standouts from this preseason game. Tyler Huntley, that's the one I'm missing. Tyler Huntley, who I don't know what it is. I know I was watching the game from a lot further away at the stadium, but when I watch him up close in training camp, you can just see he's just not the sharpest quarterback. And I don't know a ton about quarterback mechanics. I feel like his windup is kind of long. His feet seem a little shaky, like maybe he has a little bit too wide of a base sometimes. But then he goes in the game and he just plays lights out. And yeah, preseason, second team, against second team, whatever. But it is just kind of like he's a gamer, which I don't know if that's necessarily exactly what you want in a backup quarterback, but I feel like it's better to have a guy who's better in games than in practices, obviously, than the other way around in backup quarterback, because when you need him most, he's going to be there in games. I mean, he looked great. I don't know if he had any really bad passes on the day.
No, he didn't. But to your point, it is what it is. Like we saw with him what happens when he's the starter last year. We didn't win a game, and it's not because he was god awful by any means, but it just. I mean, I remarked to you today when they were throwing him and Lamar back to back, there's just such a difference on their ball and the zip behind it. Like Lamar's is so much more A to B in this way, and his is, it's sort of ducky in a way at times. But I mean, he looked great on last Thursday, and I'm sure he'll look great again against Arizona this weekend. We very much know what we have in Tyler Huntley. At this point, I think it's about, what another team thinks they might be able to have in him, and that's a whole nother discussion that I'm sure we'll get to someday.
Yeah. Any other stand? I mean, I'm trying to think. The defense forced a few turnovers, which was really nice to see after not forcing a lot, forcing too many last year. Geno Stone keeps making the safety competition really tough. I felt like he had a lights out game. I feel like he was running the alley.
He's the other one
really
that should
well.
have been mentioned. Yeah.
Had that interception. Had an interception late last season as well, and seems to be kind of building on that as he develops in camp. Again, a guy that has been just kind of puttering on the back of the roster, playing a lot of special teams, got more run last year because of injuries, and is in a position at least to establish himself this
year. Yeah, I think he definitely can. With that safety room being so deep, it might be tough at times, but I mean, he has shown a vast improvement, I think, from, I'd say, maybe the second, or not even the second half, late in the year last year, up until now. He's looked, I don't want to say like a completely different player, but he's just looked so much improved. And I would be hard pressed to say that, and we'll get to the 53 shortly. We'll talk about who our predictions are and stuff. I would be hard pressed to say that you can let him go right now.
Yeah, and it's going to make those roster decisions tough, but you think about the value he brings both on teams and to the defense on the back end. Agreed. Just a lot of tough decisions all around. Going to Arizona, going to play the Cardinals this weekend. We will not be playing Kyler Murray. We will not be playing Lamar. Lamar Jackson won't be playing. There's a lot of the stars won't play. So obviously there's kind of the wide receiver is the main one. What wide receivers are going to jump out. But it is a little bit tougher when it's Huntley and Anthony Brown throwing the ball. And you also can't really assess their chemistry with Lamar. So I would say, just in the interest of switching it up a little bit, what other than wide receivers are you going to be looking out for in this next preseason game?
I guess it would probably be those second-tier offensive linemen, especially when we're talking about the tackles and who's going to sort of take that area. We saw Flele go down today. Hopefully he'll be able to play. I almost feel like it's a guarantee he won't, just because they've been so cautious with everybody's injury so far. Duvernay, Prochet, what have you. But just really that second tier of offensive linemen, seeing which guys sort of start up. And I guess the left guard position would be another good one in that regard. Just which one of those guys are going to really start to step up and take what is a very limited amount of open positions still available on the offensive line. Right now, it seems like Morgan Moses is pretty much in the driver's seat, especially if Stanley can't go week one and it's James kick to the left. But either way, if not, just seeing those guys compete has really been kind of one of the highlights of camp so far. And it's definitely one of the things I'm looking forward to watching going into Sunday.
Yeah. I think James had a very encouraging performance. And I feel like I'm adding this caveat every other sentence, but again, preseason. But that's not what I was really looking for. I was really just looking for, how's he moving? How fluid is he? Does he look really stiff when he's going into his pass sets? And he doesn't. I would say the other thing is, what he may lack in like pure physical ability, he's kind of aware of his physical limitations, and I think knows how to use his technique to account for them. I would say that he'll be serviceable, nothing elite, but certainly better than what we had last year. Makes you feel a little bit more confident. And the other thing about having him ready to play left tackle is, instead of slotting him at right tackle or maybe left tackle if the other way around. Instead of slotting him at left tackle or right tackle if Ronnie's not ready, you just say, look, Juwan, you're the left tackle if Ronnie's not ready. Morgan's got the right tackle spot locked down, so you'll be the swing tackle who can back up both positions for us, which is, key, very important. We saw that last year because, even tackles, ankle sprain, few weeks here and there, things like that always happens. And so, having his football legs back under it, one, it's good to see, just like for a story, just like, tore his Achilles, so sat out the I can't remember what he did in 2019, but had a season-ending injury, sat out the 2020 season because of COVID, tore his Achilles in May of 2021, like right when we were getting back to it, and worked really hard. I don't think he was ever that close to actually playing last year, but he did work his way all the way back to practice, which Achilles injury for an offensive lineman. I know, you think about Cam Akers coming back really quickly, and that explosiveness is tough to get back. But being able to support offensive linemen weight on your Achilles is also really tough to get back when you're having to do explosiveness in a bit of a different way.
And on every single play.
Right. And it is just fantastic to see him back. He's talked about it in pressers, just like being back is great. And the fact that he's back and could play a real role on this team. So I'll be watching him. I think as well as the offensive line fairly closely, like you said. The other thing I'm looking at, you mentioned this with Malik Harris, is just what is going to happen at inside linebacker. Patrick Queen is obviously the clear starter there. We've talked about the safety depth, potentially guys playing down in the box. Josh Bynes is still hanging around, and at a certain point, you want to hand the inside linebacker reins over to Queen and let him start to really take command. But at the same time, Queen always played his best with Bynes next to him, and so I am curious to see if they do more of a rotation with Bynes and Harrison kind of mixing in, even Christian Welch, depending on the situation, or if it's like a very much Bynes is for the start of the season at least, especially with the outside linebacker shortage. Bynes is going to be Queen's running mate. And, if Malik has a good start to his year, shows some promise outside backer, whatever, maybe he'll get another shot later in the year. But I'm going to be watching that group closely, along with, of course, the undrafted guys who.
So I was just going to say. Yeah, the Josh Rosses and the Diego Fagos of the world.
Yeah, we got excited. They're good undrafted recruits, but just not seeing that much out of any of them. And again, it's tough to do that in camp, but no one really popped, I felt like, in the preseason game either. And I'll be watching them again this week.
Yeah, definitely. And also just one more just to kind of throw on the end. We didn't get to see Jalen Armour-Davis in the first game, obviously. He was banged up. Very interested to see if they play him, and I really, really hope they do, and I kind of expect them to, and what he's able to do. Every report about him being on the field has been pretty stellar so far in training camp. So really seeing if he can translate that into success on the field in his first actual NFL action is going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, and thinking of the Cardinals now, they have, and I'm not just talking about Rondale Moore and Hollywood Brown either. Actually, this is not even counting those guys. It's a very short receiving core, very shifty receiving core. So I'm just kind of curious to see how Davis, who's a bit more of a bigger physical guy, kind of handles that. Is he able to press them and not let them get away with him? Is he going to have to change his technique? Is Demarion Williams a little bit, is more of a slot guy? Is he better suited to cover these players? I think little nuances like that, I guess, is what I'm starting to look for in these games beyond just, how many tackles or how does this guy look in general? It's, is Malik Harrison able to play outside linebacker, or are they just putting him out there because they need someone to eat snaps up there, right? Yeah. I think those are some of the nuances that now we're in the second preseason game, you can start to look for.
Definitely.
So, I think the other thing is, the Ravens made their cuts down to 85 men today. Brett Hundley getting cut, and they moved Trent Harris over to injured reserve, who, quick note on that, he looked really sharp in special teams this weekend. I was really just disappointed to hear that he had an injury. Right after he got signed, there were a couple swim moves, and again, it was special teams, but there were a couple swim moves he had that I was like, you can use that in a pass rush. Let's see it. And so I was just hoping to at least see something, just see something out of him, see what he can give us. And it is a real shame, kind of along the same lines of Vince Beagle, that they just don't get a chance. And, it's pretty unfortunate. But that does cut the roster down to 85 players. That means they still have to make 32 cuts. And I think that's going to be tough for them to do. So what we're going to do here today is make our own. We're going to play GM and make our own little 53-man roster here. So I think the best way to do this, and I'll be keeping track on my laptop here so we don't lose our numbers. I think the best way to do this is go position group by position, but start with the locks, right? Yeah. So quarterback, you've got Jackson and Huntley. You want to take us to running back?
Yeah, it's going to be Dobbins. Gus is going to start on the IR, so he's not going to be part of the active roster. It'll be Dobbins.
But to be clear, they'll have to carry Gus on that initial 53. So the way it's you put everyone on the 53. You move guys to IR and re-sign the next.
Bring guys back.
And the Ravens do this, and we'll mention some of these players that they'll do this with, but they also do the handshake deals with veterans where they say, okay, we're going to cut you, but as soon as we put Ojabo or whoever on IR, we're going to bring you right back. So I'd say Dobbins, Edwards, they'll naturally be on the 51.
Yeah, 53.
53, thank you.
So, okay, if we're going final, all injuries aside, yeah, Dobbins, Edwards, probably Davis. Oh, this gets so tough. This isn't a lock at all because Justice Hill has looked so good, coming back, it starts to get, do they try to get Batty to sign to the practice squad? Do they just, that's tough, man.
I
It's
don't
really
think
tough.
I don't think so. This is one of the situations where they're going to have to just carry. I think they're going to have to put 5.
Yeah.
One, because you can't really risk carrying 4 just because how many or carrying 4 than putting Edwards on reserve and only having 3, including Dobbins available. You can't do that with how much we run the ball. You've got to have more guys available, especially if you don't want Dobbins' workload to be crazy at the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So I would pencil Hill, Davis, and Beatty all to make this initial roster because I think Hill gets claimed off waivers. Davis's guaranteed money is minimal, and so I think it's possible the Ravens could go with a handshake deal, cut him and re-sign him. But I think after guaranteeing a little bit of his money and knowing that they're going to eat a lot, like they're going to have to eat dead money and then re-sign him, I just don't really see that happen.
Too much,
I do think it's a little crazy, but I do think there are going to be 5 running backs on this team initially.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me the more you're kind of talking me into it. I guess just my classic brain here is saying, oh, you only have 4 running backs. But yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, Pat Ricard's going to be on there as the fullback. And then we get into receivers, which is also kind of interesting because we've heard conflicting reports. They might only want to keep 5. Like, do they go with 6? I really don't see it. So it feels like it's going to be Bateman, Duvernay, Prochet, Wallace.
I think those are the only 4 locks.
Locks,
those are the only guys. Obviously, Ravens sent draft picks on, and they hate cutting draft. Every team hates cutting draft picks, but especially Wallace barely ever got a chance to prove himself.
Yeah.
So those 4 will definitely make the team. You got Ricard at fullback. At tight end, you've got Andrews, Boyle, Likely, and Kolar. All locks. Again, they spent a draft pick on Kolar this year. Kolar may have to go to the IR right away. Or he may not. I mean, sports hernia surgery, it doesn't theoretically he can be back by week 1 or very early in the season. But again, with the roster restrictions that they have and the fact that they have Ricard as essentially another blocking tight end, who can catch passes out of the backfield and make a few guys miss or just run over them actually. But it's possible that they just put Kolar on IR for the extra roster spot early in the year.
Mm-hmm.
But Kolar definitely has to make this 53, which is the tough part.
Yeah.
Now we go to O-line, and I think this is where locks don't even get very certain.
Yeah.
So Stanley, Moses, Zeitler, Linderbaum, Macari,
Tyree Phillips,
Ben
Falele.
Cleveland, and Falele. And let me just count how many that is here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's 8. Right, that's 8 offensive linemen. That's pretty standard for teams in the NFL to carry 9. I could see the Ravens carrying 10 because there's uncertainty about Stanley and there's uncertainty about Linderbaum. So you're going to need the extra backups for them. And I think James has to be named as a lock for this reason. Something I talked about early in the offseason was the fact that James clears us $3.25 million off the cap if we cut him. And that's not I don't like Juwan James, but it was more if Ronnie Stanley's back and healthy and we have Moses and we have Falele, you don't need James, especially if you also have Macari.
Yeah.
But now Macari's playing center. Stanley's still not back. You need James. You need him to be there. So James, I think, has to be a lock for this roster. And the question really is, are they going to go with 10 offensive linemen? And we can get to who the 10th would be, Ben Powers.
Yeah.
Not a roster lock, but we're going to talk about him later as one of the honestly bubble guys. Yeah. Let's start with the defensive line, if you want to go ahead and pick this
Yeah.
off.
So it'd be Calais Campbell, Travis Jones, Michael Pierce, Brent Urban. Help me, Broderick Washington. That's 5. Who am I missing?
Did you get Jones, Matabuke?
Matabuke. That's 6.
I think those are the only. I think there are only 6.
Probably
locks.
the only 6 locks.
Yeah. Washington is a guy who may be coming into the season. You could think about him being on the bubble if an Isaiah Mack or an Aaron Crawford really, really flashed. And the funny thing is, both have looked really good. Like, I actually think Mack and Crawford could probably snag a 6th lineman spot on another roster, but not this one because Washington has looked good, as has the rest of the team. Obviously, I will say about Urban, the one thing I question with him is if he could be one of those handshake guys. So I may take him off this initial list of locks just because he strikes me as the kind of guy who they may say, look, we have to cut you, but we want you back, and this is the place. He wants to be involved.
Definitely.
Baltimore,
Everything
you can tell
he said, yeah.
What he said, his demeanor in practice, Baltimore's the place you want to be. So I'm going to leave him off the list of locks just for right now, and we can move to the linebackers.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start with the outside. So we'll go Owe, Bowser, Houston.
Hayes.
Do you think Dalen Hayes is the lock?
I'd be surprised if they cut a guy who essentially had a lost rookie year.
Yeah.
I think he has not popped in practice, and it's something that's been talked about a lot.
That's kind of what I'm thinking.
It's a concern there, but the thing is there's no one to really take his spot away from him.
True.
I would say if he was the fifth guy, he might have a shot of getting cut, but he's very clearly the fourth backer, healthy backer right now, and that's another thing to add here. Another reason I'm not sure about putting Steven Means in the locks, because I think he will absolutely be on the week one roster. But for the 53, he might be one of those handshake guys because he has played in Baltimore before. He talked about in today's press conferences how much Baltimore really helped his career. And again, the guy who's his demeanor in practice is very much I want to be here. He understands how this works. Urban understands how this works. They take those handshake deals. Right, the Ravens do that. A lot. Every team does this. The Ravens really like to do it.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure if I can put him in as a lock for the 53 again, just because of these numbers. Inside linebacker,
Queen, Harrison,
Josh Bynes.
Josh Bynes, yeah, those would be the only, yeah.
But again, handshake.
He's
right?
the definition of a handshake. Yeah.
And so I think there are only two locks for inside linebacker.
Me too.
We'll get to the undrafted guys and numbers on inside linebackers later, but I think it's clear that there are only really two guys who are guaranteed a spot on the 53. Cornerback.
So it would be Marlon, Peters, Armour Davis, Fuller, Pepe,
Stevens.
And Stevens would be the 6.
Yeah,
locks.
And that's 6. And I think that's a hard 6.
Mm-hmm.
That's locked up. Fuller has guaranteed money in his deal, so they're not going to cut him into a handshake with him. He has not looked the best in camp, but he's a veteran corner, and you can never have enough corners. I think I'd rather have him be maybe the next man up, or have to lean on him a little bit more in the season than throwing a rookie right into the mix. Especially these two guys. I like these two guys a lot, but they are more developmental than they're taken in the 4th round. They're more developmental than guys that are taken on the first 2 days of the draft, and you're like more or less comfortable starting them because of the level of wide receiver competition in college. Not quite feeling that way about Armour Davis and Pepe yet.
Yep.
What about safety?
So Hamilton's a lock, obviously. Clark's a lock. Marcus Williams, and that's it in terms of locks. That's probably the biggest X factor right now. What we do at that position, and it's gonna dictate a lot of what we do elsewhere.
Yep, and then I'll throw in our 3 special teams locks: Justin Tucker, not Sam Cook, Jordan Stout. Oh God, it kind of hurts to not have Sam Cook on a roster.
He reminded the way he was booting him today. You can call him whatever you want.
And of course, Nick Moore is his first name.
Yeah.
Not crazy. Okay, for a second I was like, that doesn't sound right, but yeah, Nick Moore, long snapper. That's 48. That's 48 guys.
Wow.
And I feel like that is a list of 48 locks. I can't see any of these players being cut and re-signed. So I would say quarterback is set, running back is set. Let's go wide receiver. Let's talk about wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard to not have a 5th wide receiver.
Me too.
Because you have practice squad elevations. I don't know if it's still 3 per. I'm pretty sure it's still 3 per player. So even if you put Jalen Moore, Shamar Bridges, and say Slade Bolden all in the practice squad, I managed to sneak all 3 of them on there. First of all, it's only 9 games. There's only 9 games you get out of them, and then you're like, okay, is it Benjamin Victor? And then you're getting to the point where it's like, okay, you really should have used that spot. So I think there's going to be a 5th wide receiver, and obviously for the purposes of exercises, I should add, this isn't incorporating other teams' cuts, because that's going to be a thing too. I think the Ravens are, one of the reasons they're not super certain about going after a vet wide receiver is because they think someone is going to shake free in the 53-man roster shakeup. training camp got Denzel Mims. Tampa Bay has a surplus of wide receivers, and they're going to have to cut somebody. And so, you could be hunting. I have to say my pick for Jalen, my pick for the fifth wide receiver, I just gave away a little bit, is Jalen Moore.
Really?
He's two things. He spent a year on the practice squad last year, and the kind of somewhat old-fashioned way that Harbaugh likes to do things, the team in general does things, is rewarding guys like that. Who, Christian Welch is a good example. We'll talk about him in a minute too. But I think Moore is the most consistent performer in camp. I think he's the one who can do the most. The trouble is that he's a 5'11" speedster, and that's not that different from Tylan Wallace and Devin Duvernay. You on the Bridges train?
Yeah, that's you just made exactly the point that I was going to make. Just because there's so many already smaller guys on this team, like there's only one other guy that comps physically to Bridges, and it's Bateman. So if you can get another big body guy in the end of the roster, especially one who looks like he's budding in the way that Shamar has, that's my pick.
Yeah, and I think the next two games are going to be key, and I think it will come down to actually special teams. Mm-hmm. I think it will be which one of these guys do we trust more on special teams. And like I said, Moore's looked really good on punt coverage. Shamar's looked really good on the kickoff return team. Like we talked about earlier, him being a very willing and able blocker, and that shows up in special teams. He knows how to use his big frame, and so I think it has to be one of those two. There's Slade Bolden hype early in camp, and he's good, but he's not good enough at any one thing that separates him from Moore, or certainly Bridges. He doesn't really, Bridges and him are almost night and day. And Benjamin Victor, I was hoping to see more out of him, but and again, he doesn't necessarily look bad. He's catching balls. Mekhi Polk is catching a lot, but they're not. That's
a tough one. Yeah, they're completely spaced out on him.
Yeah, they're not separating out as much. And Polk is probably, to me, the third, if anyone, behind Bridges and Moore, as just like the most consistent performer. He's just always in the middle of stuff. Doesn't really have a lot of drops, if any, that I've noticed. None that are really, really bad ones. And he turns his guy around every now and then in one-on-ones. Mm-hmm. And that's always nice to just be able to see a guy win a one-on-one matchup. But I'm still sticking with Jalen Moore, but I do think it's going to be 5 wide receivers. Tight ends, I don't think there's anything to change here, right?
No.
Josh Oliver, I just don't think there's room for him. Again, maybe if he really wants to come back after we move Kolar to the IR, but even then, I just don't think there's that room for him.
No.
So I just want to make sure we've got that's 48, and so we're now at 49 players. Mm-hmm. So we've got 4 spots left on this roster. Let's go to the offensive line. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 locks. I think I'm almost ready to call Ben Powers.
Me too. Yeah, me too. Lock him in. There's really not much, and it's like there's really not much more that needs to be said. It's just this team's going to be running the ball more than anybody in football. All we talk about, especially last year, the past couple of years, that they can't protect Lamar. If there's one facet of the game that you're going to overstock on and make sure that there is zero chance that you're going to end up with your ass out in the playoffs on, it's going to be the line.
Well, and, I was, very much expecting Ben Powers to actually be traded. Not because he's bad, not because they don't like him. They like him a lot. He started 19 games in the last 2 years. That means NFL teams know he can play guard. He can start. And a team like the Bears or the Raiders or there are a couple of teams I was thinking of and I can't remember now, but teams that need, the Lions even might need, they have a really good offensive line, but if one of their starters gets injured, I think their right guard is injured right now, and so if he stays injured, they might be looking to just upgrade instead of just slotting in a guy. And Powers is not a all pro kind of guard, but he'll be a starter in this league for a while. Mm-hmm. He's got what it takes. He knows how to step in when he's needed. The reason he's going to stay on this roster is because he's learning how to snap.
Yeah, the versatility. Yeah.
The issues with Linderbaum, the injury concerns with Lindy, mean you need another emergency center. And I would much rather keep Ben Powers on this roster than Tristan Colon as the emergency center, or having to constantly worry about elevating Colon from the practice squad to serve as the emergency center. Just not something I want to worry about. And you think, if there's even one injury at left guard or at guard, then yeah, Ben Cleveland assuming Tyree Phillips gets the starting job, which I think he will, then yeah, Ben Cleveland can step up. But even then, in game, there are injuries. Guys, have to step out for a series or two, whatever. And I
Guy
think,
loses his helmet for a snap, just dumb stuff.
yeah, and then you have a guy like Ben Powers ready to come in instead of Khalil McKenzie or something like that. And I think that is you can't put a price on that. And Powers, to me, Powers snapping the ball raises his value, his trade value, and versatility. But I also think it raises his value of Baltimore, and I think that's why he'll hold on to the roster. So that's 50. Defensive line, I think we can skip past defensive line and outside linebacker. Let's talk about the inside linebackers first.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we can kind of combine this with the safety discussion.
Yeah.
Because there's only 3 locks for safety. There's only 2 locks for inside linebacker. And you'd have to think that between these 2 positions, they can't have more than 8 between these 2 positions with how much they've devoted elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right now we only have 3 more spots, and we have 5. So yeah, if we're gonna give the rest of the spots to inside linebacker and safety, we may have to. So I think starting at safety, I think Geno Stone is going to make this team. He's just looked so good in the preseason and in training camp that I think he's going to make this team. Ardarius Washington is a tough one because he flashed last preseason, didn't really get an opportunity to play too much last season, even with the injuries, and broke his foot. And now he's back, and I don't know what to do with him. It's almost like the team has just kind of moved on, and it sucks. I actually need to look up his contract details because I know he has one, obviously, in a way that because he was undrafted free agent. He signed I think a 3-year deal, I believe. But it was only guaranteed for last year. Mm-hmm. So we cut him. You don't lose anything. You don't lose any money by doing that. And I just think it's just tough for him to hang on, especially a team that is, they're trying to win now. We wouldn't want to let go of Jefferson, for example, completely and keep Washington. So I think for me, Stone is the 4th lock at safety.
Yeah, the only argument for keeping Ardarius Washington at this point is, it sucks. You don't want his chance to go out the window because he's hurt. But from a logistical standpoint, every single sign would point to, if we were dealing with nameless, faceless players here, which we're obviously not, but if we were, he'd be the easy cut.
Yeah. So I think Geno Stone's the only lock at safety because you've got Jefferson, I think, is very clearly one of those guys who could take a handshake deal. And the other one is Josh Bynes, the inside linebacker. So I don't know if I'm necessarily going to slot them into the 53 yet. I think Christian Welch is going to make this team, though.
Me too.
Special teams beast. They love him on special teams. But even more than that, he's looked so much better than the undrafted guys. He is really holding them off for that last inside linebacker spot. And I just think that the team likes to reward guys who stick with the team and grind on special teams and work hard. And so that gets us up to 52.
Yep, and I think the other spot is going to ultimately end up going to Bynes. I think that they are going to decide that it's a lot safer going into the season with, it might be a little bit of a lower floor potentially at middle linebacker than, if something crazy happens and one of these undrafted guys pops and ends up being a Pro Bowler or something like that. But the way it's looked so far, none of them have taken that step up yet. So I think they'd be much more comfortable going in Queen, Harrison, Bynes, Welch than, Queen, Harrison, Ross, Jamario Moon. Just like to me, it's sort of, for lack of a better term, the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And a lot of times in the NFL, you kind of prefer to take the chance on the upside, but it doesn't really look like any of the other guys have shown it. And we know that Welch can play, and we know that Bynes can play. So for a Super Bowl ready team, I don't think that's a spot you really want to take too many chances in, especially considering that who knows with what Mike McDonald has planned this year, how many times we're even going to see 2 middle linebackers in the field. So I think it's just a spot. It's like, you know what, let's go with what we know. Let's play it safe and bring in guys that know how to play this scheme, even though McDonald's scheme isn't all that, from what we could tell, isn't night and day from Winks. So, and knows the franchise as a whole.
it's going to look a lot like Winks early on, and people are going to hate it.
Yeah,
And I'm not saying this necessarily from what I'm seeing in practice, but just from the personnel they have and the fact that they're going to have to use, stunts and twists to generate pressure. They're going to have to blitz Queen and use his speed to get to the quarterback. They're going to do things that look like Winks defense early on because they don't have that pure edge rushing talent. But once they do get that pure edge rushing talent back, they're going to morph into a very deep dropping coverage team, trusting your coverage and trusting your edge rushers to just get to the quarterback and win their matchups. So Bynes makes 53. And I think you're right about Bynes because he, I think, has the most guaranteed money in his deal out of him, Jefferson, and Brett Urban. And those are the three guys that we specifically left off for those handshake deals that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think Urban comes back for sure. I think Kolar and Edwards go to the injured reserve. I don't see any other. There's no other player right now that is a clear injured reserve candidate unless there's obviously a setback. Like other guys that could start the year on injured reserve. Tyus Bowser is Tyus Bowser. We forgot David Ojabo. So
but he just it's more just a matter of semantics because he's definitely going to be he's going right on the IR. So it's just Urban handshake deal, probably Jefferson handshake deal, and then there we are.
Yeah. Ojabo goes straight to the IR. That does raise the question of I think that's why Bynes may not make the first 53 because you have to get Ojabo in there, and then you move Ojabo to the injured reserve. I think we're just trending towards Edwards starting the year on IR and sitting out the first 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
That's two spots you open up. So that's Bynes, and I would say probably Urban.
Yeah.
Kolar is a third. I think that opens up the spot for Tony Jefferson.
Yep.
And the last one I'm not really sure about is how we get Steven Means on this roster because I think he makes this roster, but I'm just not quite sure how we get him there.
I don't know. To me, he feels like one of those guys that's just going to be a really hard decision, and you're ultimately going to have to make the hard decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, maybe he ends up as a veteran on the practice squad. But these numbers are getting tough, I think, is the main point kind of this exercise is even the guys that we talked about having to try and distinguish themselves, the inside linebackers, the undrafted guys, the receivers, there's still so many guys ahead of them that it's just really tough. I do think that we'll have to figure out how to make, for example, the handshake deals and stuff work with the right players. Who are the ones that you're gonna cut because they can't be guys who can be claimed off waivers, and they have to be guys that are gonna come back. And so, I think Bynes, Jefferson, Urban, and Means are probably the top 4 candidates for that, and then you figure out how to get them back. We've even mentioned Kevon Seymour, who I know Harbaugh likes. He likes what he brings on special teams. Probably a practice squad candidate, but again, it just shows you how tough these decisions are going to get, and how much they are going to have to prioritize kind of youth and who they've drafted and invested more resources in to keep on the team. But I mean, I feel pretty comfortable with our predictions.
Me too. Regardless, it's going to be a very interesting few weeks.
Yeah, and obviously, like I said earlier, there's going to be all the players that other teams cut and come free on the market, and sometimes they're surprising ones that you don't really expect and you want to jump on them.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, this has been an absolute blast. It's been absolutely excellent to finally do a live and in-person pod. Hopefully, the first of more that we'll do. We're going to keep trying to figure out new ways to bring you kind of more unique, fun content. We kind of had a good time last year getting used to doing the pod, I feel like, but now we know what we're doing, and so it's time to ramp it up a little bit. So a lot of exciting things to come, and hopefully this kicks it off.
Full steam ahead, baby. Let's go.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and we will be back with a new pod sometime next week. Thanks so much.